Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And do you remember that YouTube video that was floating around a couple of years ago? I think it was a couple of lawyers who were in it. There's maybe a short one and a tall one. They're both wearing sunglasses, maybe? And the short one is bringing up scenarios where you as an individual, as a viewer, might come into contact with a law enforcement officer who is asking you questions about something. And so they throw out a scenario, and then the taller one would be like, yeah, in that situation, you're going to want to, paraphrase his mind, shut the heck up. And then the short guy throws out another scenario, and the tall guy's like, shut the heck up. And some people were offended by this video because they're like, oh, that's impugning the integrity of law enforcement officers. And almost every law enforcement officer I've ever met has been great and honest. So I get that little bit of offense, but I also really get what they're doing. And I like it because they were reminding the audience of how Americans have a Fifth Amendment right not to answer questions and not to incriminate ourselves. I think it's a brilliant political innovation that is there to bring balance to the imbalanced relationship between the individual and the state. The state is in the position of total power here. And even though the state might almost always get its judgments or accusations right, I mean, we all know for a fact that wrong accusations happen way too often. And sometimes those false accusations and those false convictions happen just because of an honest mistake, clerical error. Somebody messed something up. Maybe people really thought they had the right lady or the right guy, and so they drove hard after it, but then in the end it turns out that they just started to see the patterns that weren't really there and they were wrong, and somebody got wrongfully convicted. So just a bumbling mistake can be one of the reasons that you need protection against the state and can't be forced to incriminate yourself. But the other reason is malice. What if somebody has obtained a powerful position like that and they want to use it to work out some axe they have to grind, or to cover something else up and make themselves look better and use you as a scapegoat? Well, if you live in a situation where you can be pressured into speaking and saying the invisible things that are in your mind, under that kind of duress, under that kind of pressure, we know it's not that tough to coerce a false confession. That is why you will hear people say, I take the Fifth. I take the Fifth Amendment on the grounds that I might incriminate myself. You are allowed to do that. So that Fifth Amendment could be a handy thing if you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt like you needed to exercise it. However, what if the judge in this scenario, the prosecutor in this scenario, was perfect and never got anything wrong ever, and knew exactly which words you said, the brash statements, the fumbling, clumsy, awkward words, the careless whispers, knew exactly which things you said were representative of things that really happened and who you really are? What if this judge was so insightful that whatever they saw going on behind those words you said was inarguably and definitely and irrefutably, immutably true? Well, that would be a very different equation. That would be a very different relationship between the individual, the potentially accused, and the person in the powerful position. And that is the relationship that we see playing out in Matthew chapter 12 between Jesus, who the text holds out as being right about everything and the Son of God and correct in all of his judgments and given authority to actually do the judging. He is having run-in after run-in with these Pharisees, people who are very good at maneuvering verbally to always be right. They're just skeezy with their word acrobatics and lack of accountability, and they can get away with it with most people because of the educational classes of the day, but they just cannot get away with it with Jesus. He catches everything they're doing. He cuts right to the quick and gets right to the heart of the matter and knows exactly what they were thinking. So we got back-to-back Sabbath controversies in Matthew chapter 12 with the Pharisees accusing Jesus of doing everything wrong. Jesus does what he's going to do anyway. They're like, fine, we're going to murder you then. So Jesus withdraws, and weirdly, the crowds follow Jesus out to wherever he withdraws to, and so do the Pharisees. While he's out there, Jesus heals a guy who's demon-possessed, blind, and mute. Everybody's like, it's very, very impressive, except for the Pharisees, who are like, not impressive. You did that because of demons. And then Jesus responds to these ludicrous accusations, shooting them down, and then he verbally pivots to the offensive position and says directly to everybody there that you might be forgiven for criticizing me, Jesus, but you're not going to be forgiven for blaspheming the obvious and overt, miraculously confirmed work of the Spirit, work of God that is going on here. And then he goes further, saying what is really deep down in your hearts, you religious leaders, is accurately reflected by what's coming out. That is not a careless whisper. That is not just some flippant throwaway remark that doesn't really mean anything. No, it means something, and it is a true belching forth of the things that exist deep down below in the bowels of you, the bowels of the earth, that bubble to the surface when you speak. And specifically, he says to them, for out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they've spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. So on one level, this is a repetition of why the Fifth Amendment exists. Like, if you just don't say anything, then you can't be acquitted or condemned. There's nothing to it. But here, again, the equation is different, because the whole passage starts out with, Jesus knew their thoughts. So I guess in that situation, your Fifth Amendment becomes worth little more than the paper it's written on, because Jesus knows your thoughts. Nonetheless, Jesus clearly says, again, directly to the Pharisees, that's who he's talking to here. He knew their thoughts and said to them, hey, you guys might imagine that you can word weasel really well, and that might serve you with most people, but it's not going to work with me. You're going to have to give an account on the day of judgment for all these things that you've said, all of the word weaseling that you've done. And then he rounds out the thought once again, saying, for by your words you'll be acquitted, and by your words you'll be condemned. Now, some of you who've read a bunch in the New Testament might at this point be going like, wait a minute, did Jesus just change the whole ground rules for how somebody is made right with God or not right with God? I mean, what about the stuff from the Sermon on the Mount, where he's talking about this righteousness that would have to surpass that of the Pharisees in order to enter the kingdom of heaven? I mean, it seems like Jesus has been saying that rightness with God, that being acquitted, to use the language of this passage, is something that happens because of the work of God. It's the righteousness of Christ imparted to people. That is what the text seems to intone, both in what we've looked at and with what's coming forward. But wait a minute, when he says, for your words you'll be acquitted, and by your words you'll be condemned, it seems like, what, is he making up a whole new set of rules here? No, what I think he's doing here is a technique that Jesus uses a lot, and that is to reference a normal order of things that you are familiar with and that the people he's arguing with have already assented to. I mean, you Pharisees, you guys conduct trials all the time, right? You know how this works. And by people's words, they're acquitted, and by people's words, they're condemned. The only difference is this time around, you guys are the ones on trial, and you're used to being the ones who are in the seat of judgment, not the ones on trial. So rather than lining Matthew 12:37, for by your words you'll be acquitted, and by your words you'll be condemned, up against other passages in the New Testament that deal with salvation and being right with God, it would be more analogous to line up Matthew 12:37 against Matthew 7:1 and 2. Don't judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. You Pharisees are great at keeping track of who said what. You probably have your little network of people, your little birds that sing and tell you what other people said or are doing, and boy, are you good at holding people to account for that stuff. Well, you guys know the drill. By your words you're acquitted, and by your words you're condemned. And I heard what you were grumbling. I know what's going on with you guys. I know all the things that you've been thinking and saying among yourselves, and I've been right every single time, haven't I, guys? So understand that the rigorous measures of judgment that you Pharisees have been so quick to dish out toward the simpler people, the more common people, just know that is coming your way. Every man is going to give an account on the day of judgment, and not just for the big, elaborate, carefully crafted speeches, even for the little stuff. So does this mean, then, that you and I should be more careful with what we say? I mean, yeah, I guess. I don't think that's really the central point of the passage. I mean, there are more explicit statements in the Bible about speech. Ephesians, so you get the language about let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, except that which is useful for building others up in the Lord. That passage is pretty direct, seems to indicate a need for you to understand your audience and understand what would be useful for building someone else up in the Lord. I think of James chapter 3, where we get all of that language about the taming of the tongue, the potential of the tongue. And both of those passages I just referenced are designed to go out to a big, broad group of Christians. Whereas here in Matthew chapter 12, this whole speech is clearly directed at the religious leaders who just accused Jesus of working in league with the dark forces of Satan. And Jesus is rebuking them for their particularly unique problems. Does that mean there's nothing to take from this? No, because the rest of the Bible supports the idea that what you say and how the mouth works is part of the equation of kingdom values, is part of the equation of being a person who has had an encounter with the king and now wants to emulate the stuff about the king. But the harshness of this language is a particularly targeted judgment against a group of people. So it's one of those places where I think we gain more value by looking in from the outside, understanding the narrative structure, understanding the principles behind Jesus' rebuke of these people, and extrapolating that out maybe a little bit less specifically in terms of what we do. Again, if we want more specifics on what a kingdom use of our words might look like, there are other passages that are more smoking gun and useful in that regard. Here, the general principle just seems to be that maybe everything is a Freudian slip. Whatever is going on inside the heart is going to manifest in the words. That's undisguisable from the true judge, about whom it could be said Jesus knew their thoughts, and therefore thoughtfulness about words in light of the values of the kingdom and the work of the king is probably a good idea for the person who is a kingdom citizen. Next time around, we're going to see the Pharisees try to get back on offense, and it's really laughable, and we're going to have fun with that passage moving forward. Some of you decided to support the program at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast, which is crazy. The fact that some of you do it is also why we get to do this every day. So thank you very, very, very much for doing that. I noticed that a small handful of new people signed up over the last week, and you're awesome. Thank you. That's wildly encouraging. All right, we're going to hit pause there. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do it again soon.